Well, the Kyrie Irving era is over in Brooklyn anyway, but for Dallas, it's only beginning. A blockbuster trade reported on Sunday afternoon, and we're with you to break it all down. Welcome into our NBA TV studios. It's game time. I'm Kristen Ledlow. He's Greg Anthony. He's Sean Powell. We do have games to talk about as well, and we are going to eventually. It is a 6-game Sunday. 4 are already underway or wrapping up. But first, the breaking news in basketball. Within days, the Brooklyn Nets have fulfilled Kyrie Irving's trade request. The details, as they've been reported: the Mavericks sending Dorian Finney-Smith, Spencer Dinwiddie, an unprotected 2029 first-round pick, and second-round picks in both 27 and 29 to the Nets in exchange for Irving and Markieff Morris. Ryan McDonough, former NBA executive and Phoenix Suns general manager, joins us now. Ryan, explain the process to me of a player's trade request to its fulfillment and all of what had to happen in the last 48 hours or so.
Kristen, I think the contract is really important here in this situation. Kyrie Irving was going to be an unrestricted free agent this offseason, meaning he was going to leave the Brooklyn Nets. He delivered that message over the past few days. And I think that was the final straw for Joe Tsai, the owner, and Sean Marks, the general manager. So they canvassed the league. They talked to all the teams with Kyrie interest. Keep in mind, Brooklyn wants to remain competitive as a championship contender with Kevin Durant on the roster. So I think in Spencer Dinwiddie, they got the best positional replacement they could get for Kyrie Irving. They also got a good role player in Dorian Finney-Smith. And I think part of the reason they did this deal now was the first-round pick they got from Dallas. I wouldn't be surprised if they repackaged that to try to upgrade their team around KD and now Dinwiddie.
How about Luka and Kyrie playing together? Is that a deal you would have done? 2 guys you would have put together?
I don't think I'm the gambling type when it comes to Kyrie Irving. I look at his previous stops in the history, Kristen, between the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Boston Celtics, and now the Brooklyn Nets. He's 0 for 3 in terms of it ending well with those relationships. So I understand why Dallas did it, though. They've struggled when Luka's off the court or out of the lineup as he is now. They needed a second star, another shooter and playmaker. Certainly Kyrie Irving is that. But this is a gamble, and I think if you look at Kyrie's history, handing him the keys to your franchise and giving him that control, which you will have as a pending unrestricted free agent, I think that's a big risk by Mark Cuban and the Dallas Mavericks.
Hey, Ryan, the one thing about the risk, though, is they kind of put themselves in this position with how they dealt with Jalen Brunson. The fact that they weren't able to re-sign him when they had a chance prior to last season. And the reality is they had to find another mega star to play alongside Luka if they really wanted to have a chance to contend. And so while there is some risk, I don't know if there's any scenario where there wouldn't be some risk if you're going to have to find a superstar to pair alongside Luka.
Excellent point, Greg. And it's becoming more and more difficult to get elite players in free agency. As the contract amounts have continued to go up, more and more players are signing early extensions. The recent trend is they're not getting to unrestricted free agency. So that leads either 2 avenues. One is you draft a young player and it takes a while for a player to develop. That does not match the timeline of the great Luka Doncic. Or you trade for a player and you get the best player you can. So it is a gamble for Dallas, but I think they do have downside protection. They only gave up 1 first-round pick. Dinwiddie was going to be an unrestricted free agent if he's not extended after next season. So this is a dice roll by the Dallas Mavericks. Nico Harrison, their general manager, and Jason Kidd, their head coach, have relationships with Kyrie. They think they can get through to him. And so there's no reward without risk. This is certainly risky by Dallas, but it is a roll of the dice for a team that, to Greg's point, had fewer options once Jalen Brunson walked out the door in free agency.
Hey, Ryan, from Brooklyn's perspective, how tricky is it to trade a superstar in the middle of the season and he's going to become an unrestricted free agent? Is there a large universe for that, or is it kind of small?
I think it depends on the player. Sean, I think if Kevin Durant were in play instead of Kyrie Irving, you'd have 28 or 29 teams lining up for a bidding war because of Kyrie's issues on and off the court, more off the court, frankly, than on the court. The issues extend, to the locker room, between the lines when he does play. We all know he's pretty darn good. So I think that did limit the market. And then you look at the teams in the mix, especially the two from Los Angeles. Those teams have made big deals in the past. What the Lakers gave up to New Orleans to get Anthony Davis, what the Clippers gave up to OKC to get Paul George. Those are not teams with a lot of young players or draft assets, and that's why I think Dallas was in a pretty good position. They have control of most of their first-round picks going forward. They had a positional replacement in Dinwiddie and a good wing defender, a 3-and-D guy in Finney-Smith. And so I think as Brooklyn surveyed the market, this is not a great return for the Nets, especially given what they hoped they would put together 3.5 years ago when KD and Kyrie showed up in 2019. But it is a solid return that keeps Brooklyn competitive given the limited marketplace for Kyrie.
You mentioned, though, that they may not be finished with these picks now as assets and 4 or so days away from the NBA's trade deadline. Where do you think the Nets are going to look to stay competitive this season?
Well, Kristen, keep in mind they owe a bunch of unprotected first-round picks and pick swaps to the Houston Rockets still because of the James Harden trade. Not the James Harden trade to Philadelphia, the one before that. It gets confusing, but the one when James Harden went from Houston to Brooklyn, they gave up a bunch of unprotected picks and pick swaps. So I think part of the reason, not only to do this deal with Dallas, but to do it today, was to get the 2029 first-round picks from the Mavericks. That pick is unprotected. As soon as this trade is finalized, then Sean Marks and his front office in Brooklyn can look to trade that and put it in play to try to upgrade the roster. They do have Ben Simmons in addition to Kevin Durant. Now they have some good depth with Dinwiddie and Finney-Smith and others on the roster, Patty Mills. So this is a team that still has championship aspirations. They don't have a ton of young players, so I think they'll try to use that first-round pick to bring in, to add to their depth. I think especially on the front line, Kristen, if I were in Brooklyn, that's where I'd look. The Nets have some perimeter and wing talent, but they have been beaten up front at times. Nick Claxton's had a terrific year. He doesn't have a lot of bulk. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Brooklyn tries to add a center, especially someone with some strength, over the next 4 or 5 days.
Hey, Ryan, the other, 800-pound gorilla in the room is how does this affect Kevin Durant? What's his mindset? What's the thought process of him moving forward? Because, again, remember, this is a person who demanded a trade, either me or them, this past offseason when it came to Steve Nash and Sean Marks. They ended up firing Steve Nash. You have to wonder how he's going to deal with this and what his thought process is going to be as they now try to revamp this roster for the umpteenth time in literally the last 13 months.
And that's why I think Brooklyn will be very aggressive, trying to utilize that first-round pick from Dallas, the young players on the roster, whatever they can to try to appease Kevin Durant. I don't see a scenario in which they trade Kevin Durant between now and Thursday's trade deadline. I guess anything is possible in the NBA, and we've seen wild things happen in this league, especially in recent years. But I think they'll try to upgrade the roster. Keep in mind, Kevin Durant's contractual situation is very different than Kyrie Irving's. He signed a 4-year extension that I was down in Atlanta with you guys just before free agency started last year, and we were talking about KD's trade request in late June. They've obviously played half to 2/3 of the season. Durant played great when he was healthy. He's still on the roster. He's still under team control for a number of years. So I think Brooklyn will do whatever they can, Greg, either with that pick, with their young players, with creative trades to try to appease Kevin Durant. They have him under team control for a while, and they want to win with KD because if you let him walk out the door, especially without draft picks and with pick swaps and all that they owe to Houston, it could be a decade or more before you're in position to get a guy who's as good as Kevin Durant.
Ryan, thanks so much for taking the time. You can take your blazer off, but just keep it nearby just in case, because there's no telling how much more we're going to need to call you over the next several days. We'll talk to you soon, undoubtedly.
Kristen, for you guys, I'm ready anytime. Call me whenever.
Awesome. This conversation can take us down many different avenues. Let's start in Dallas with Luka. He quite obviously needed some help. The team is 0-7 in games that he's sidelined, and now he's got a generational point guard on his team. How do you think that duo will shake out?
I think they'll work well. Everywhere Kyrie's been, he's played well. It's never been about the play.
Right.
The other stuff we can talk about at another time, but in terms of his ability to play, listen, he's going to be the best basketball player that Luka has played with since he's been on the Dallas Mavericks. And that's saying a lot when you factor in Luka's already played in the conference finals. You know, he's gone to a 7th game in the playoffs before, prior to that conference final. So I think the fact that they bring in not just another generational talent, but he's also a dynamic scorer, playmaker. And so now what you might get is addition by subtraction. I think you'll see Luka's usage potentially go down a little bit, but the team goes up because they had a lot of one-dimensional players that at times will struggle when they are going to be forced to have to make plays. To be able to have those two guys on the floor at the same time, it creates a lot of challenges. And ultimately, now it's how you build around those guys. You can have more specialists now when you've got that type of dynamic talent, as we saw with Brooklyn, right? When Kyrie this year, they went for a stretch where they're 18-2 with those two guys as really the only first and second option type players, and everybody else can then just fill in the void. And so I think they'll work well. It'll take some time to get on the same page, but they've also got the right kind of coach in Jason Kidd. Somebody's going to command respect, that you're going to have to listen to, and who's going to hold you accountable on the court. And so if I'm the Dallas Mavericks, for a team that's always, let's face it, they've been kind of cheap and really conservative over the last several years.
That's probably the word they would prefer.
Yeah, give Nico Harrison a lot of credit for being bold and going out there. Because, again, you owe it to your best player to give him a real chance. You know, otherwise, he's just going to keep putting up all these historic numbers, but they're going to be empty because you're not really going to be contending for championships unless you have some high-caliber talent to play alongside him.
Sean, you've mentioned to me your concerns several times this season about Luka's usage rate. We also were looking at the projected depth chart at this point. How does this move address each of those issues?
Well, first of all, we're talking short-term here because Kyrie's not signed long-term. So anything we talk about with Kyrie and Luka and how it's going to work, we have to put that caveat in there. They've got to sign him to a contract extension. I don't think they make this deal unless they give him a 4-year extension. That's what he wants. Because he's an unrestricted free agent and he can walk. The Mavericks have made mistakes in the past regarding star players. Steve Nash. They did not pay Steve Nash. He leaves, he goes to Phoenix, he wins 2 MVPs, and Dirk all of a sudden is like, hey, where's Steve Nash? And so Dirk wins only 1 championship. So now, at the beginning of last year, they have a chance to keep Jalen Brunson, 4 years, $55 million. They don't do that. He walks and goes to the Knicks. So now you have Kyrie coming in. You got to pay him. You have to pay him, keep it happening, because now you're kind of, sort of, on the clock with Luka.
Right. And you know what? I'm sure that Steve Nash is relieved to know that's why we're talking about him today, right?
Yeah.
We love you, Steve. Can we look at the Western Conference standings? I just want to point out the parity thus far this season and show you, how close these Mavs are, not just to staying well within the playoff picture, GA, but potentially having home court advantage in the playoffs.
Yeah, home court advantage in the first round. I mean, let's have perspective. There's 9.5 games. They don't have the time to make that up. Denver's too good, Memphis, those teams. But to your point, Chris, the fact that they could maybe get into